Now, a couple of months ago, I accepted a challenge from one of you to write a log line for my musical as a writing exercise. And what I came up with ticked all the boxes until it didn't. And I realised I was writing a story that wasn't the story I wanted to write. So this is why it wasn't working, what I'm doing about it, and how I think the answer was staring at me the whole time. Hi, I'm Scott. You're watching Inside Musicals, the channel for all things musical theatre. When it comes to music or writing or anything else in my life, I'm a big believer in following my gut. And if something doesn't feel right, I want to acknowledge it and do something about it. And so I don't feel any shame in sharing these false starts, even if it seems like slow progress, because as many of you would have experienced, creative pursuits are rarely linear. There's a lot of back and forth and revision. And much like Michelangelo carving away the stone that is not the sculpture to reveal the sculpture underneath, eliminating these wrong turns helps narrow my choices to focus on the story I do want to tell. I think in my heart, I know what this story is. But in my head, I'd not yet clearly articulated the structural elements that give the story momentum. So if you're facing similar obstacles, tell me I'm not alone. Let me know where you're at and how you're getting past them. Now, the interesting thing about this project, in spite of each revision, is that the setup hasn't changed since day one. It's still about 4 actors who've been playing children in a pantomime for 35 years, and offstage their relationships have soured. But at the same time, they're bound by a pact they made 35 years ago of one in, all in, meaning as long as one of them wants the show to go on, the show goes on and they all have to stay. And for years now, they've kept each other there out of spite. And this one constant tells me there's a worthwhile idea there, but maybe I'm missing something that I'm yet to take advantage of. And I think I know what it is. We'll come back to that. But the problem with the setup is not the story. It's just a circumstance in which the story plays out. So the circumstance of the Titanic, for instance, could focus on the engineer and captain and tell a story about man's hubris in the face of nature. Or in James Cameron's version, it focuses on a young woman who defies social convention to live life to the fullest. And a story, in Western narrative tradition, needs a perspective to identify a main character and an event that forces them into action and escalates to a resolution. And that's where I've changed course a few times. I've superimposed new, unrelated events onto this setup. In one version, it was where the younger characters try to usurp the older ones by taking over the lead roles in the pantomime. So the conflict was essentially a turf war, us and them, the older characters united against the younger ones. Now, they had a certain charm, but the story I wanted to tell was one of us and us, the long-standing conflicts between those older characters that have simmered for 35 years. Now, I do want those characters united by the end, but that tells me they shouldn't be united at the beginning. And I do want the younger characters to try to usurp the older ones, but now it's going to be an incident within the story rather than the thing that drives the story. Now, for the logline challenge, I had one of the older characters cancel cultured. So he's dropped from the show, but he's retained to train his own replacement. So it's essentially a story of an arrogant man, humbled and redeemed. And that worked for that character. But again, the conflict was with an outsider, the replacement, and the media, which sidelined the other older characters because it didn't really push their buttons or force those unresolved issues. Plus, this is a chamber musical with a cast of 9. Most of them already play multiple characters. I don't want to add additional characters if I can help it. So what's the solution that was staring me in the face the whole time? Well, I know I don't want to play out the whole 35-year saga, so it's not about how they got to where they are, but how it comes to a head now in a way that makes sense of that history. So the solution is that one in, all in pact, which is interesting because my working title for the show is One in, All in. You'd think I'd planned it that way or something. So here's how it comes into play in this new version. When the pantomime is on the verge of closing after 35 years, one of them's the holdout, and he calls upon that pact. Now, they've all done it before, but this is just one time too many. When he won't be reasoned with, the others decide to make his life hell till he changes his mind. It's not fancy, it's not clever, and it seems so obvious now, because it takes advantage of what was already there. Someone does something to someone else to get something they want. They make his life hell to break their contract to get on with their lives. there's a doingness about it, which is much closer to the story I wanted to tell, and it feels like a step forward. So now there's an escalating conflict between those core characters in the here and now that arises naturally out of their fractured history. The outcome is measurable. They either succeed or they fail. It's either good or it's bad. And for a comedy, it feels kind of fun. And I want it to feel every bit as playful as the pantomime within the show. And so for the characters, there's a clear motivation, but there's also a clear dilemma. How far will they go to hurt one of their own to get what they want? And what if it gets out of hand? When does conscience kick in? And what if there's a weak link in the group? Now, in a musical, songs take up a lot of space. Yes, they can condense time, they can be economical, they can be a kind of shorthand, but there's no room for excess dialogue or bloated scenes, especially in a show like this where I'm including excerpts of the pantomime. So the simpler the concept, the more room there is for characters to bump against each other. Even the great shows turn on a simple concept. Sweeney Todd is built on revenge. Guys and Dolls is about a bet. Now, complexity doesn't come from convoluted plotting or bizarre concepts. It comes from the richness of the writing. And this is the lesson I keep learning. When it comes to a choice between simple and clever, simple is usually the answer. Maybe one day it'll sink in. As the good witch of the North said, "You always had the power, my dear. You just had to learn it for yourself." So what lessons do you keep learning in music, in performance, in life? Leave me a comment. But for now, thank you so much for watching. I do love you. Better out than in. Now, get out there. Be brilliant.